Okay. Hi guys, my name is Meg Loeks, and real quick, let me just get a couple things ready to go here. Through this presentation, I'm going to have the chat open. So you can ask questions. I can't promise that I'm going to see them while I'm talking. I'll try to look at the chat. But if you want to save your questions for the end, that's great. And also in regards to my connection, hopefully you guys can hear me okay. We do have a storm coming in and I live in a remote area, so there may be times where I have a little bit of a poor connection. Don't freak out. I'm sure it'll just be really quick and then come right back. So I'm going to be talking today about looking to art for inspiration. I photograph my family and have for many years. They are my main subjects. I did take on some client work years ago and then quit client work when my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia. And I decided at that time that I would no longer take on clients and just focus on teaching, which is where my passion lies. So today I'm going to be discussing things that inspire me and keep me motivated. And it looks like you guys are all popping in. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'm really honored to be talking to you about this today. So I have 4 kids, and they range from 8 years old to 1.5. And as I mentioned, they're my main subjects. Real quick about my gear, I've listed my gear here for you guys to see. I do have 2 different camera bodies, and I recently just switched to the Sony a7R IV. And the reason I made the switch, I get this question a lot, is just because I really love the focus on Sony, and has an amazing auto eye tracker. And I use all Sigma Art prime lenses, and I have a drone, and then also use Profoto lighting as well. I am mainly a natural light photographer, but I also use Profoto lighting when I need to, when natural light isn't cutting it for me. And as you can see here in these slides, I have listed in many of them the lens that I've used, and some of them I'm also going to be including my settings, so you'll be able to see what my aperture is at, ISO, shutter speed, all of that. So with finding inspiration, and you can find inspiration through many things, of course. What I find inspiration through is art, and this can be classic art and paintings. It can be photographs, illustrations, and children's books, music, films. It's really endless. I also am inspired by just daily routine moments, mundane moments with my family, and that could range from anything from like getting ready in the morning, getting dressed. But like, let's be honest, like right now, everybody's pretty much wearing pajamas all day, every day. So we basically wake up and just put on a new clean pair of pajamas. But I'm photographing all those moments. I'm photographing mealtime and prepping for mealtime. I'm photographing my kids, brushing their teeth and tying their shoes or trying to tie their shoes. All those things are inspiration for me. And then also personal projects. So those for me, and I'll get to those towards the end, but I do have personal projects that I will motivate me, basically monthly projects that I do. And real quick, there we go. Okay, so drawing inspiration through classic art. I feel like this is a really big thing, I think, too, right now. And for me, I'm really drawn to Dutch masters. So that's like Vermeer. And I've put up a couple of his, really famous paintings here. But the things that I'm drawn to specifically with Dutch masters and painters like Vermeer is their use of light and texture and color. And as you can see here in these examples, one light source, pretty dramatic lighting too, I would say. Both subjects are close to the window. There's lots of texture here, beautiful, rich colors. And so those are things that I'm really drawn to within my own work, and that you'll see often within my work. So again, rich colors. Typically, I'm working with just one light source. So everyday moments here, I'm including lots of different layers, repetition of color. Again, another example of just one light source, and we're really close to the light, as you can see. So we're getting a dramatic light fall off here in these shots. This is actually, there's a Vermeer painting right behind me in this one with a milkmaid, and this was one of the last nursing moments I had with my daughter. And so everything here was very intentional. But again, I'm trying to include a lot of texture and color here to help also balance the image. And as you can see, I've got just these splashes of color throughout my frame to make sure that my frame isn't heavy, or at least too heavy on one side. So I'm adding like the pillow on the left side to kind of help balance it out. Again, another example of a daily routine moment, also kind of inspired by Dutch masters with the dramatic lighting and the colors. And this one too is actually inspired by some of the colors that I saw within Milkmaid and the fabrics as well. And again, one light source here. And this is a daily routine moment, just mundane moment. So my daughter, is the first time that she was having food. And I wanted to photograph that, but then I also wanted to kind of photograph all the other moments kind of in between moments. And that was also like the cleanup afterwards and the self-portrait. And so I got in the frame here, as you can see. And this is also, I would intentionally balance this image just with the things that I'm wearing. I knew I wanted to include the curtain in the window, and so I was intentional about wearing like the cream sweater and all of that to give it this frame balance. Another example of Dutch Master light, and this is actually, I used Profoto A1, so this is not natural light here. I tried this shot first with natural light, and it was really, really low light. I wasn't getting strong highlights and deep shadows and just enough contrast on my son. And so I used an A1 here in this shot. Again, more use of like texture and framing, and again, one light source. And this is another example of just being inspired by Dutch masters and color as well, portraiture, all of that. So I also am really inspired too by Renaissance, and so this is a perfect example of where I saw a painting that I really liked, and I studied it for a while. What were the things that I really was drawn to? And right away, the first thing I noticed is, of course, the connection, but then also the colors, the red and the blues, the rich colors, the textures, and how the fabrics kind of draped over her. It was really beautiful. And so I took the things that I loved about this and sort of recreated it my own way. So as you can see here, obviously not like the same kind of landscape in the background or anything, but I took a lot of the things that I liked in the fabric and the colors and recreated that myself. This would be another example, same dress as the one before actually, and same coloring, another Renaissance painting inspiration. So I have this project that I've been doing actually for quite some time. It's been about 2 years, maybe a little bit over 2 years. And I have been replicating Norman Rockwell's work. He's one of my, favorite artists. And one of the things that I love about him is just his amazing ability to storytell. He's a great storyteller. He always just includes these just wonderful layers of symbolism within his work. And he just really painted the classic American lifestyle that I'm drawn to. It's a really simple life. And so I, over the past couple of years, have been taking his work and replicating it. And this is an example of a shot that I actually did recently. And it turns out that I even had like the same picture and almost the same dress that the woman is wearing in the painting. And so I replicated this one recently. But as you can see, there's intentional layers here. One of the things I loved about it in his original was just how there's these like splashes of orange. We've got like the orange picture in the foreground and then her orange dress in the background. It really leads the viewer deeper into the frame. And that's one of the things I really wanted to do here. So I'm intentionally including these colors and creating kind of like color harmony within my frame. I did see a question. Did I color grade my photos with presets? And I do occasionally use presets. I have my own presets, actually, when I'm having to edit a bunch of images. So if I ever need to like batch edit a bunch of images, I'm going to use presets. But if it's just like an individual, just one image, I typically hand edit that, especially if I need to do like a composite or something where I need to really manipulate the color. I'm going to hand edit that. And I use both Lightroom and Photoshop when I'm editing. When I do a hand edit, I usually call within Lightroom, do basic editing there, and then if I have to do creative edits, I bring it into Photoshop. I like to use brushes within Photoshop. I think that they are just easier to use. So I do all creative edits within Photoshop. This is another painting that I loved by Norman Rockwell, and I replicated this with my son, Woody. He's my middle child, and he's like the artist of the family. He really loves art, so this was like perfect for him. And it was really fun because he enjoyed this too. So it was kind of like a collaboration with him. And again, one light setup here. The things I loved about this were just, obviously basically him looking at his reflection in the mirror. And I basically pulled that into my image, but at the same time, this image has like dark colors. It has that like the rich colors that are true to me. So I kind of made it my own by doing that. Another image sort of inspired by Norman Rockwell. This is actually a Norman Rockwell radio. And for me, this was a fairly easy shot to do. It can be really challenging working with little kids. Especially at her age, she's 1.5. I can't pose her in any way. So I try to be creative in ways to get my children engaged. And with her, I just placed this radio here and I turned it on. And so it was playing music. And so she naturally ran up and started playing with the knobs. I was hoping she would do that, and that's exactly what she did. So I try to think like them and think what they're going to possibly do, and then be prepared with my camera, have my settings all ready to go so I can capture this candid moment. Another Norman Rockwell painting. I love this one, and I really resonated with this one because I have 3 boys. Then my youngest is a daughter, and 2 of my boys are in Boy Scouts. So this is another reason why I love Norman Rockwell, and he had 3 boys, I believe, and a lot of his paintings had Boy Scouts in them, and it's big in our family. So I recently did this one with my boys. I had to search online. Some of these things we have lying around our house, which is great. And then some of these things I do have to try to find. And obviously I can't go anywhere. I can't really shop right now in antique stores. So I search online, and I found this vintage chest pull online, and it was perfect for this. And my boys had a lot of fun with it too. So but as you could see in this painting, the colors were something that I was really drawn to. And so I did intentionally include, pops of red, as you can see here. This is another one, Girl's Haircut. I have loved this one for so long. And again, I knew I wanted to do this with my daughter, and I knew that I would not be able to pose her. So we did something similar. Obviously, I wasn't giving her a haircut. I was just doing her hair. And as you can see, there are marshmallows on the nightstand here. And I could have edited those out, and I just decided not to. For me, it was kind of like one of those things where this is kind of the stage we are in right now. And whenever I do her hair, I have to usually give her some sort of treat to keep her still. So I wanted to keep those in there. But as you can see, it's fairly similar. There's like the reflection in the mirror like there is here. And I was working in a really, really tight space with this, with my camera on a tripod. And my camera is all the way backed up against the wall. And the tricky part of this was obviously getting her reflection. She's very small, so I had to angle the camera just right. and like off to the side, and there was definitely some distortion because of my lens and the camera being so close to us. So it was a tricky shot, but when I finally got the camera in the right area, it worked out fine. So this is one that I did with my husband, kind of ridiculous, but this was the image that we put together. And so obviously it was around Christmas time, and this is actually a composite. So I decided to first take this shot and then get a photo of my son as the composite in the mirror, so his reflection in the mirror. And I intentionally, when I shot this and shot the reflection of my son, I intentionally manually focused it out of focus so that he would be soft. So this is, again, like the before, this is the after. And again, I just took this idea, but then kind of made it my own with the colors, the dark wall, all of that. So it doesn't have to be exact. You can find, of course, artists that you really love, and you can make it your own just by taking some of the things that you love about the painting or the illustration or whatever it might be, and pulling that into your work, into your frame. Another one by Norman Rockwell, and this is the one I did with my son. So similar in some ways. Some of the colors are similar too, actually. I decided to add like some of these things like the lamp in the background just to enhance depth. So I am using mixed lighting here. I've got natural light coming in from a window, camera left, but then I also have this additional light here in the background. That's just giving, another layer to the image. The Fishing Trip by Norman Rockwell. So this is of my boys. And the thing I loved about this image is it wasn't something that I noticed right away, but it seems to me like these three boys, I don't know the backstory of this, but I did notice after studying it for a few minutes that there's like different class systems here. So the boy in the middle is dressed really nicely, and then you notice like the boy on the left is more like middle class, and then we've got the boy on the right that has kind of like torn pants. And that wasn't something that I noticed right away, but then when I did, I just absolutely loved it. I loved how there might be some sort of like hidden symbolism here. So I did intentionally try to do that with my own image too, and having some of my boys dress a little bit nicer than others. Another one by Norman Rockwell. So I've been doing these for like 2 years, so I've got quite a few, but it just shows you, different ways that you can be inspired. So with this painting here, there's some of the things that I loved were like the bandage on his toe, and also how both the dog and the boy have their tongues out. I thought that was really cute. And so I ended up doing that with these two, and it was a little tricky. My son, he was great with it, and he loved doing this, and he was so proud of his birdhouse. But my puppy, what we ended up doing was just giving him a little bit of peanut butter. And so I had to time it just right, and I took several shots and got one of him licking the peanut butter off of his mouth here. So outside of Norman Rockwell, I do other things. And so this is another one, and this is by Sophie Anderson. And I loved this image this painting the minute I saw it. I loved the fabric. And it was a little different for me because there's a lot of light colors here, there's a lot of white, but it's dramatic lighting. You could still get a moody image if that's what you're into. You could still get a moody image. It all depends on the light. So with this, you can see that the light source is really close to them, just outside this drape that's hanging around them. And so this ended up being my image. And what I did, it's such a janky setup, but it's just her crib mattress on the floor. I'm sitting next to her, and I have the pillow over top of my legs, and I'm holding on to her with a book. And the drapes, they're just cheap sheets, white sheets that I've draped down. They're hanging from like a backdrop stand. And I have my Profoto B10, camera left, it's right behind the sheet, just sitting on a chair that's acting kind of like as a lamp. And that's helping to light us. But the beautiful thing is that the sheet is also helping to soften and filter the light. So the light's really close to us here, but it's softened by the sheet itself. And so I knew that I couldn't get a shot of her sleeping. She's still in a crib. So we kind of made it our own, where like I just had her laying here with me. And Actually, how I was able to get her to look towards the light was I just played a music video, Itsy Bitsy Spider, on my phone, placed my phone near the light, and so she was able to like look in that direction. And so then I was having like nice light fall on her. Because again, I can't pose her, I can't really give her any sort of direction. And I planned this too around nap time. So this was right before she was about to take a nap. So she was tired, she was pretty chill. And I was actually a little bit surprised this ended up working out. I knew that there could be a good chance that she just would like run off, and that would be the end of it. So this one ended up working out. And I kind of lower my expectations before I do any of these kind of shoots and just hope for the best, because with children, if you know they don't want to do something, like especially with my kids, if they're like not feeling it, that's it, you know. And I did see a question about how long did it take to develop this photograph. I'm assuming it's this one here. And it honestly took, this one was probably like a good 20 minutes to set up, and just like put the sheets everywhere and like hang the sheets down, all of that. So yeah, it was a good 20 minutes to have this all set up. So another painter that I'm really inspired by is Mary Cassatt. And the reason I love her work is because she just painted motherhood so beautifully. And I think that's one of the things I'm drawn to about her is just the connection that she painted. And so often whenever I want to get in the frame with my children, I look to her and like the poses that she painted for ideas. So this is actually an example, and this was taken several years ago. It's one of the first images that I took with my little one here, my son, who's now much older. And I was really inspired again by the work that I had seen of her. And so I took that pose and kind of made it my own, again with the moody editing, the dark background. Obviously, we're close to the light source again, which is giving us this beautiful like dramatic light fall off. This window is a north facing window, so I'm always getting really soft light coming through this window. And so I shot in here a lot because of that reason. Okay, so this is an example of, you know, finding inspiration through photographs. So I've covered a lot of like finding inspiration through classic art. That's kind of an obvious one, but you can also find, of course, inspiration through photographs. This is Eric Enstrom, and this is a photograph. You can see it in the very background. It's called Grace. And whenever I include this photograph in my my shots and I post it on Instagram or whatever, I always get so many comments from people saying, my grandparents had that photograph hanging in their dining room, and so did mine. I don't know if it was like this huge thing back then, but like it sounds like everybody had this photograph hanging in their dining room. And so my great grandparents did, and I really love it. And so it's hanging in our dining room. And you can see there's just layers of basically within this frame. We've got my two boys in the foreground that are framing my son in the middle. And they're all kind of replicating the photograph that's in the background on the wall. And I did get a question, when was I first inspired by Norman Rockwell? And honestly, I think it was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I don't remember when I came across his work. I mean, I've known about Norman Rockwell for as long as I can remember, but I did come across his work. I don't know if it was like Pinterest or something like that. And I actually replicated one of his paintings. It was about 3 or 4 years ago was the first one that I did. And I just started looking at his work, and I just really resonated with it just because, again, just the boyhood aspect of a lot of his work, and then Boy Scouts and military, all of those things really kind of tie back to my family as well. So you can also find inspiration through illustrations and children's books. I have a workshop that I teach actually, and it's an online workshop, and one of the assignments is actually to look to children's books for inspiration and to replicate an illustration within a children's book. And so for me, this was inspired by Winnie the Pooh, but I have been told that this like looks like something out of a Stephen King movie. Um, but and yeah, whatever. I guess that works too. But this was actually inspired by Winnie the Pooh. And so within my workshop, that's one of the assignments that I have is to looking at children's books and illustrations, especially if you're working with children. And if you wanted to photograph your own children, or of course you have clients. So I would hope everybody knows this one. But this is inspired by A Christmas Story. It's one of my favorite Christmas movies. And so this is another place that you can find inspiration through films, right? And this radio is actually a family heirloom, and it's included in a lot of my shots. It means a lot to me. It's my great-grandpa's old radio, but it works really well for this photo and this image too. And I bought this online, and my son Archie just like nailed the expression perfectly. He's seen this movie too. So this ended up being inspired by A Christmas Story. This is inspired by Anne with an E, and I'm obsessed with this show, and I've watched all 3 seasons 3 times. And this was a still. I shot a still. I was watching the last season, and a scene came on that I really, really loved, and I took a quick photo of it with my phone, and then I replicated it myself, just because I loved like the creative setup of it and the different layers and the use of a mirror, basically. And so the thing is with me, whenever I find inspiration, a lot of times I'll take a quick picture with my phone, or make a quick note on my phone or a notepad or planner. And I keep like running lists and notes like everywhere. So if I see something, I immediately try to save it somewhere, because if I don't, I'll forget. So that's really important for me, just because we're so busy, and I've got 4 kids, and I can't remember anything. So I do keep a running list so that I'm able to remember these things and come back to them later when I have the time. So this is just an image actually taken during quarantine of my husband and I. So how does this translate into the everyday? And for me, I take a lot of the art that I love. So Dutch masters, storytelling by like Norman Rockwell, and work by Mary Cassatt. I take all of that, and I try to bring that into my everyday and photographing my everyday and my routine with my family. So my big driving force is nostalgia. That's what I love to photograph, what I'm drawn to photograph. For me, nothing brings me greater joy than seeing my kids experience the same things that I experienced when I was younger. So that's my big driving force. Also, this would be another example. I spent a lot of time when I was younger outside, catching fireflies, being barefoot, playing with my brother. We lived in the country, so I love to give my children this childhood as well. And so these are the things that I want to photograph and that move me the most. So another way of having this artwork transform into like every day for me is with Dutch masters. It's really about being intentional with a color scheme, creating color harmony within your image. So I am, or at least try to be, intentional about colors within my frame and layering and creating balance. This image has balance with the splashes of green that I have on the left and then I have on the right. I can't always perfectly prep a scene, but if I have the time, and with her, when she was this age, she wasn't really moving around, and obviously in this bath shot, she's not going to be moving around, so I'm able to get the scene ready in advance before I bring her into it. And this was actually taken, I'm going to show you a BTS of this shot. This was taken actually with the Profoto A1X, so this is not natural light here, and you could see the behind the scenes of this. This is a pullback. We have a covered porch. Our sink is also really, really deep, and so there's not a lot of light falling down into our sink. So I had to use a Profoto A1X on a light stand with an umbrella, deep white umbrella. It's just outside our window, And that gave me a really nice boost of light. And I was able to photograph her. I used my 24 millimeter here, just standing on the couch. My feet are actually right underneath this towel here that's off to the right. And so that covered my feet, and I was able to take this shot shooting downward. But that A1X is what actually lit her. It's not natural light. But it looks like it because it's being shot through the window. So again, with like Dutch Masters, I'm using one light source typically. Not always. Sometimes I mix light. But the reason I guess I just love this just one light source is because of the depth that I get from it. It really creates this dramatic, beautiful light that's really painterly, romantic, and that I really love. Another example of just one light source. And I did get a question, is there a chance to see a comparison between shots straight out of camera and color graded? I don't have any in the presentation, but you know what? I do often, if you follow me on Instagram, when I post an image, I almost always post a straight out of camera shot in my stories. I at least do it like once or twice a week. So I do it often. And so if you do follow me on Instagram, you'll see that when I make a post, I usually will say straight out of camera shot and outtakes and stories, and then I usually include several of those. But again, this is one example of just like one light source, dramatic lighting. So another thing that I'm pulling from Dutch Masters is just use of texture. And you could see that here. So this was actually, this image, this was taken during quarantine, created this little puppet show. And again, my kids had so much fun with this. And so I created this scene, but then I let them know what I was doing. And we recorded so many of their like little puppet shows and stories, and we sent them to grandparents. So they had a lot of fun with it, and I was able to get a lot of shots too because they were engaged. Super important. But when I first took this shot, I actually had different curtains hanging. They were much darker, and I just wasn't feeling it. I knew something was off and something was wrong, so I changed the curtains, and I changed it to something a little bit lighter, and then like the same kind of color as her dress. And then I felt like it all kind of came together here. This is actually, I do have a lighting diagram here. So this is the lighting setup. There was a window camera left that's helping to naturally light them. And then there's the puppet show. There's a Profoto B10 behind the curtains. And that's what's lighting the puppet show. So you can see that here. So it's just my Profoto B10 and natural light mixed in this shot. So with Norman Rockwell, one of the things I loved about him, again, as I mentioned, was his storytelling and just like comic relief. Kids are funny. They do funny things. And so especially with her at this age, one of the beautiful things I love about toddlers is that they're so like unaware of the camera at this age. And so a lot of the expressions that you get are really authentic. They're very real and they're very natural. And so the tricky part of it is that moments can be over very quickly at this age. So you have to be ready. So I did set this scene up. And this is a shot that I did with my boys when they were much younger. And so I just kind of redid this shot again with my daughter. And so I brought her into the scene, and I had this all laid out just like it is. And my cat just happened to photobomb this. And at first I was kind of annoyed because he's always really curious, and I was kind of like thinking he was going to probably ruin the shot and maybe jump up on the table. But then in the end, he kind of made this shot for me, and I'm so glad he photobombed it. He was sitting on the bench right next to her. But I got so many great expressions from her here, and it was very easy for her to look in the right direction, look towards the light, the window's camera left. I intentionally placed the stack of pancakes towards the window so that she would look at the stack of pancakes, so that she was getting nice light falling on her. I don't want the stack of pancakes to the right of my frame, away from the windows, away from the light. I want her to look towards the light. So I am thinking about these things and being intentional about these things. So this one here, again, more like Norman Rockwell inspired. If you look at his work and his paintings, he has a lot of stuff with animals. And he includes a lot of pets, like dogs especially, in his images, so, or in his paintings. So I'm doing that too as well. Again, more kind of like comical stuff with children. And with this shot, I had taken this is my son's bedroom, and I had shot it from the hallway. So I used like the door to frame my child. Again, north facing window, so I'm getting some really beautiful soft light in this shot as well. As I mentioned earlier too, one of the amazing things about Norman Rockwell was just his ability to just capture, or to illustrate, American way of life, a classic way of life. And so those were the things I'm really inspired by with his work. So it's a lot of, playing outside, and, my boys with their Boy Scouts, meals around the table, all of that kind of stuff, which is what you see here. So again, getting outside, and one of the things that I read about him that was really fascinating was too that he was really drawn to like country life, and he would spend his summers as a child in the country, but he actually lived in the city during the school year with his parents, but he hated it. He never loved it. And so that's why a lot of his illustrations you'll see are just like small town and in the country as well. Let's see here. And then this one is, I have a series going. This is our family doc, and I've had this series going for many, many years where I just take photographs of my children on this dock. It's our family dock. It's a small lake that my in-laws live on. And I try to think of different ways that I can photograph them out on this dock. And one of the things I love to do is capturing reflections, but the environment has to be just right for this. I have to have like basically no wind. I have to have a sky. I have to have like some sort of clouds that are going to really, cast a beautiful reflection on this lake. So the environment does have to be just right. But again, it's, for me, all about kind of slowing down and capturing like these quiet moments. And I'm really drawn, I get this question too about, it looks like my life is just so peaceful and calm, and it's really not. It's the total opposite actually. But I tend to photograph the opposite way of what I feel. So I'm constantly like seeking out these like quiet moments with my children, and just these like very still, peaceful moments, because it's not that way a good majority of the time. And my boys are like wrestling in the house, and they're loud and all of that. So for me, I really like to photograph the opposite way that I feel. So normally I'm like, stressed out, but then this like brings me like right back down to earth here and keeps me grounded. So again, more on like nature shots and stuff like that. And this was taken too with my 105. This is my favorite lens to use outside. And the reason I love to use this lens outside is just because it has just a beautiful, amazing compression. It's a great portrait lens. And so I use this 105. I shoot basically wide open or close to it a lot of the time. And it really helps to isolate my subject and just kind of creates this like magical feel. But as you can see here, I like to do this kind of shot too where I'm shooting from like the outside in. So when I'm working with one window, as I've mentioned, I do that a lot of the time, working with just one window. I try to think of different ways that I can get a shot just from this one space. So I'm shooting inside, maybe alongside the window. Then maybe I'm shooting from above, bird's eye perspective by the window. And then maybe I'm going outside and I'm shooting from the outside in. And I'm trying to think of at least 3 different compositions that I can get from like a single session with my children, by this window. So this is one of my favorite perspectives. It's not always easy to do. And again, I have to be really quick, because my children will only like stand here for so long before they're like running away and moving on to the next thing. And the Sigma 105 is not a macro lens. This is the Sigma Art 105 1.4. So there's the Sigma Art 105 1.4, but then there's also the Sigma Art 105 2.8 macro. So that's the difference there. I just got that question. So we also live near the Great Lakes. We live near Lake Superior, so I'm getting outside and shooting a lot here, and the beach is like my favorite time to shoot, actually, or like the winter is my favorite time to shoot at the beach. And the reason is because there's just, first of all, there's nobody there, but it can be really beautiful, and we get these amazing skies. So I'm out there a lot of the time. But again, as you can see here, I'm using color theory and really trying to hone in on that with this shot. And again, more like on use of color and being inspired by Dutch masters with like rich color and all of that. So as I mentioned, personal projects. I want to make sure I'm doing okay on time. Personal projects are something that also keeps me motivated. So I'm looking to art, like classic art. I'm looking to films. I'm looking to music, illustrations, all of that for inspiration in my work. And I tie that in with my daily life and my routine, and try to document that, but then include things that inspire me from like Dutch masters and stuff like texture and color. Then I also have these personal projects that really keep me motivated. And every year I try to set like a couple of goals and personal projects. Like a perfect example would be photographing all 4 of my children in the frame once a month, or doing a self-portrait once a month. I try to keep it pretty low key. And the reason is just because I don't want to get like too burnt out. I don't want to have like too many projects going on where it's just too much and it's not really reasonable. So I try to keep it low key, and often I end up finding out, like just this week alone, I did 3 self-portraits, and usually I only try to shoot for 1 a month. So it just depends on like what I want to do and if I'm feeling motivated to do that. This shot was actually taken about 2 weeks after my son was diagnosed with leukemia, and we came home from the hospital. He's still wearing a hospital bracelet, as you can see, and this Captain America shield is a gift that somebody had given us. And he was really into superheroes at that time, and he still is. And so they had given him this while he was in the hospital, because he's really into Captain America. So we brought him home after being in the hospital for a couple weeks after his diagnosis, and we shaved his head because he was going through chemotherapy. We knew his hair was going to start falling out. And so I took this shot, and it ended up being one of my favorite shots that I've ever taken. I don't know if favorite's the right word, but I guess maybe the most meaningful. And so what I ended up doing is, for me, a personal project was documenting everything that he went through for 3 years, because his treatment was for 3 years. So this was actually one of the last shots that I had taken, and I intentionally, it's a little bit hard to see, but in the background you'll see this photograph. I intentionally included it in the background, and also the Grace photograph in the background. That was intentional, putting those things in the background. But this was the last chemo that he had taken. So I knew I wanted to capture that, and also, of course, bring in the Captain America shield as well. So this was a project that I had ongoing for 3 years, just kind of documenting. So this was the first one, and this was the last one. So personal projects are a great motivation and inspiration as well. And this one here is self-portraiture. So again, that's been something that's been important to me for a really long time. I've been trying to get in the frame about once a month for several years now. And I honestly think it's one of the hardest things to do. It can be really frustrating, and I have a lot of flops that happen, a lot of them that don't turn out. I use a tripod and an interval timer on my camera. For these above shots, I actually have, what I do is I have a Manfrotto light stand, 12-foot light stand, and then I have a tripod arm that attaches to the light stand. And I'm able to shoot downward with the tripod arm. I don't always use that method, but most of the time I'm using that method. Sometimes if my husband's around, he'll help me with it. I'll get my settings on my camera and everything ready to go, and then I'll ask him to help shoot this for me. But a lot of times I'm using my tripod and tripod arm. And the reason I like to use an interval timer on my camera is because I like to be hands-free. So I don't like to have a remote in my hand. I like to be connected with my kids and holding them. I usually especially like she's sleeping right here, my daughter, but now at the age that she's at, she's 1.5. She's much bigger and she moves around a lot, and it's really hard for me to have something else in my hand. So with these self-portraits, they're really important to me. And like I said, I don't have a lot that turn out, but I learn a lot from it. And it's something that I really do enjoy. And, I don't know if my kids are going to treasure these or not when they're older. I'd like to think that they would, but it's tough to say. But I do enjoy doing it. And especially with my daughter at her age, she's completely 100% dependent on me. So I'm around her all the time. So for me, I want to be in the frame a lot because she's attached to me. So this was taken with my 24 millimeter, and with above shots, I'm usually almost always using my 24. And with this, I was just working in a really tight space. This is my master bath, but it's extremely small. And so I had the camera on a tripod directly behind me. And so you can see I intentionally wanted to include these layers here. I wanted to focus on a reflection in the mirror, but I also wanted to include us in the foreground here to just give this image some depth and some layering. So I was intentional about how I did this. And thank you for the kind words. I am periodically checking the chat group, and you guys feel free to start asking questions now because I am going to be wrapping this up here pretty soon, and I can answer questions for you guys too. So this is another personal project, just capturing my husband in the frame as much as possible, especially in his uniform. For the longest time, I didn't ever really do this. And then, I don't know, it was about 2 or 3 years ago, I realized I didn't really hardly have any images of him in his uniform. And it's a big part of our life and has been forever, basically, since we started dating. So, I wanted to capture him in his uniform. And with my daughter here, she loves to wear his shoes and really anybody's shoes. So I set this up in good light right by our front door, which is where they would be putting on shoes anyway. So I do try to be intentional about that and having my environment kind of like make sense with what's happening. So they are by the front door, and she's trying to put on one of his shoes here. But you could see they're looking towards the window. I do get this question a lot, and I think I talked about it in the beginning a little bit about, can I get dramatic light and have like a moody image with a white background? And you definitely can. It's all about the light. So making sure that you have some really strong light, and that's what we have here. And they're obviously close to the light source too, which is going to give them a dramatic light fall off. So I wanted to see if you guys had any questions. It looks like there are some. Who are some of your current favorite photographers? I would say one of them is Caroline Jensen. I love her. I've always been inspired by her since the very start. She was actually one of the photographers that really helped me find my voice. About 5 years ago, I was taking several classes online. And I think that was another question was, what's like my background and like in all of that. I actually have a degree in advertising and public relations. So I don't have a degree in photography. I didn't go to school for photography. I was taking photography in high school, and I was in like yearbook staff, and I loved it. And we had actually a dark room when I was in high school, and I would spend a lot of my time developing my own prints. I started with film. So I learned on film first. And then several years ago when I started having children, I started taking classes online. And Caroline Jensen was the one that really helped me find my voice. And I discovered that I was really drawn to low light. I was drawn to moody edits, Dutch masters, all of that it was okay to like push underexposure. Because at the time I was really new to everything. And I thought like, everything had to be just perfectly properly exposed. And I learned that I could kind of to alter that a little bit and create, my own thing and gravitate more towards like moody edits and all of that. My go-to lens is, yeah, she is wonderful, by the way. Real quick, I don't know if I would say Emma Wood too. Emma Wood was the other photographer that I still absolutely really love, and she's one of the nicest people too. So I would say those two photographers. My go-to lens is the Sigma Art 105 1.4. That's for outside, and then I would say for inside would be probably the 35, the Sigma Art 35. The reason is because the 35 is like the most versatile lens. If I had to take just one lens, it would be that one because it's going to work in almost every situation. And indoors, I'm often working in tight spaces, so that's why I'm using the 35. It's great for environmental portraiture, which I love. So it's a great storytelling lens. Outside, I really love the compression that I get from the 105. So I like that creamy bokeh from it. I'm often shooting it wide open with that lens at like 1.4, 1.6. It's super sharp. With that lens, it's a long lens, 105. So I'm backed up pretty far from my children. I don't tend to shoot close-ups very often of them. As you can see, I tend to back up quite a bit and capture a lot of the environment. Even with the 105, I'm doing that. So I tend to be quite a ways from them. I also like that because I feel like I kind of like am a fly on the wall. I let them kind of be and do their own thing. And that's usually when the magic happens, like something really funny happens. So I try to like back off and let them do their own sort of play and just kind of document it. So let's see. How do you ensure focus when you are doing self-portraits with your toddler? So yeah, I don't use a remote. So what I tend to do is just pre-focus. So let's say like we're sitting in a chair and I know that we're going to be sitting in a chair. I will pre-focus on that. Like I put like a stuffed animal or something there and focus on that in advance before I hit the interval timer to start shooting. Now, also I have, like with the Sony, there's like the auto eye tracker and stuff. So that also I have found, I've kind of tested that out a little bit and it seems to work great with self-portraits too as well. So I don't know if you had saw the slide with the in with an E replication that I did where there was like the self-portrait with me and my husband and my husband was in the mirror. That was with my Sony, and that, I have the auto eye tracker on with that, and I was tack sharp. So that's really handy and works wonders for like focusing. And then I did get a question too about advice for staying motivated to create. And this is such a good question because like I feel like I'm in this like period of life right now where I'm so drained, and I don't know if it's just because of like months of being kind of quarantined and trying to juggle all these things with having children in school and also trying to work, and my husband and I are trying to like tag team work, like he works and then I work and watch the kids and have them do schoolwork and all this stuff. It's hard. It's really hard. So I do give myself some breaks, and there are some days I try to shoot every day if I can. But over time, like I've done a 365 for years and years, but I've only successfully done it once. And that was one of the first years that I did it. And I like made myself shoot every day, even if I didn't want to. And then I sort of like let go of that and realized that might not always be the best approach. Like if I don't feel like I want to shoot that day, I don't feel that I need to, and I don't feel like I'm going to be a terrible photographer in any way if I don't shoot every single day. So I do give myself some breaks and allow myself, to just kind of just chill with it. I stay motivated, honestly, by looking to artwork, especially when I'm in a rut. If I'm in a rut, I'm looking at art online. I love to go on to Pinterest, actually. I hate Pinterest otherwise. I'm not a big Pinterest person, but I will go on there to look at artwork. It's a great place to go. If you have an artist that you really love, type in their name in the search and then save a lot of their stuff. And that's a great way for me to stay motivated, is looking at artwork and films and movies too as well. And then also looking at past work. So if you ever need like a boost of self-esteem, like go back and look at your old work or edit old photos. I do that a lot too. And then it helps me realize like how far I've come. And of course there's always room for improvement, but it's really, really beneficial to do stuff like that. And then any advice for doing some photography work with magazines? And I don't know. I don't know if I'm like the best person for that kind of a question either, because, I just kind of tend to do my own thing. I will say, I guess it depends on the magazine too and what they're like looking for. I know if you're like wanting to do stock photography, you want to be careful about the things that your subjects are wearing. If it's your family, your children, wearing, obviously they can't, with stock photography, they can't really be wearing things that have brands on them. So like they can't have like Nike and, or like cartoon characters. It has to be very plain clothing. I tend to already naturally be drawn to that type of clothing. And so a lot of the things that I buy for my kids are really simple. And for the most part, a lot of them really, they don't care what they're wearing. I do have one son that is really into like superheroes right now and stuff. And that's fine. And he can wear that stuff. But I do try, and when I want to photograph him, ask him if he'd be willing to wear something. And I just tell him, you don't have to wear this for a little bit for the photo, and then you can take it off if you want. I don't try to push him to do it or anything, but I do ask him, and usually he's cool with it. So that's really my only advice. It just kind of depends, I think, on the magazine and what they're looking for. How do you get sharp photos in fog? So fog can be really hard to work. It's my favorite type of weather to shoot in. I absolutely love to document my children in fog, and that weather is like, we get it all the time here, especially in the spring and in the fall. And what I found with fog is the longer the focal length, the heavier the fog is going to look, because you're getting like that heavy, beautiful compression in the background. It makes your background larger than it really is, right? With a longer focal length. So I'm often shooting with a telephoto lens in the fog. This happens to be in a wide angle actually, but you can see like the fog was crazy thick that day. And so I was using my 35 here, but normally I'm shooting with a longer focal length. It's really going to enhance that fog. And what I do in editing and post-processing to really make my subjects pop is I, specifically within Lightroom, I will use the dehaze tool and put like a radial filter right over my subject and use the dehaze tool to kind of make them pop, add some contrast to my son here, and contrast, dehaze, clarity, and that really helps to make him pop against the fog. Let's see. And you said there's some other questions. Besides photographing your children, what's your favorite subject or genre of photography? I would say probably flat lays. I really love to do flat lays, and I do them a lot. Actually, I like to bake, so I do a lot of like baking and do flat lays with I usually bring my kids into the scene. Typically what I do is I first take the still. So I set up the still, the flat lay. I take the shot of just the still first, and then I bring my daughter in because I know that she's gonna probably just destroy it, the whole scene. So I do my safe shots first, especially if I need to composite, and then bring her in and just let her go to town and eat whatever. And she obviously loves to do that. If I have like a pie or whatever, she's gonna be excited for that, cookies. So I would say I really enjoy flat lays. I also really enjoy like landscapes, although I'm really new to that. I really don't know what I'm doing. But that is something I think I could see myself doing as my children get older, is getting into that. Is there any other ways to make a living as a photographer if possible? And yes, there definitely is, and I do. So I don't take on clients. And as I mentioned earlier, I stopped taking on clients when my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia. And because I just couldn't I felt like I was doing two jobs. I was teaching online and doing workshops, and then I was also taking on client work, and it was just too much, and I needed to focus a lot of my time on my family. So I continue to teach to this day, and so that is one way of making an income as a photographer. I do think it can be hard, and I think that I ended up getting pretty lucky with that. I teach through Clickin Moms and Photo School, but I have 2 online classes through them. I also travel around, not right now, but I travel and do in-person workshops as well, and I do really enjoy that, and I like especially doing small in-person workshops with people and connecting with people. So that is another way. I know you can also make an income just from working with magazines and all of that as well. So there are ways of doing that. Also, stock photography too would be another option. But again, as I mentioned, with stock photography, there are some things that you need to follow. And one of those things would be like clothing and not having brands on clothing. So real quick, I think the last question that I'll answer here, there's 2 questions. Do you only use Profoto? And for created light, yes, I only use Profoto. So I'm about, I would say like 85-90% natural light photographer. If I have good natural light available to me, I'm going to use it. But whenever it's not cutting it, whenever I don't have good natural light, especially in the winter, it gets like dark here at like 3:30 in the afternoon. So I use my Profoto lighting, and that's the only lighting that I have. I love it. One of the beautiful things I love about it is that it's just so easy to use. It's so easy, and the light looks amazing. Like my B10, I can warm the light right on the unit. So I can cool the light, warm it up, and a lot of times I can match the light, the temperature of the light with natural light if I need to do that too. So it's just wonderful and easy to use. And so I've never felt the need to use anything else. And I saw a question about, do I run into photographers who try to put you down? Not really. I mean, every now and then I might get like some weird, strange comments or whatever, but I just don't, reply to them. I don't really have ran into situations before where there's been photographers that have tried to put me down or anything like that. And let's see, I think that's all. I think I answered most of the questions. And you guys, if there was a question that I missed, I tried to answer all of them. But if I missed one, please feel free to message them to me. I'll try to answer them any way that I can. But thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciated this, and I hope that you guys are all staying well and that you're finding motivation, and that this hopefully inspired you to find motivation through art and all of its different forms, whether it's through classic art and paintings and illustrations or films, music. There's just so many different avenues. So thank you.